Domestic violence. It was in our house at the level of torture. And as a child, I was beaten, I was tied up, I was locked in closets, I was hammered, I was burned. Just to name a few of the things my father did. Everybody thought he was a great man outside the house. Inside our house lived a monster. 12 years old, I sat my mom and my older brother down at the kitchen table, and I said, if I get a gun and I shoot him, will you back me up? During that time, my father had a steel-handled hairbrush, and he would hit her across right dead center in her where her heart is. My mother stayed in that hospital as a Jane Doe for 2 weeks because she was too afraid to give her real name. I thought he had killed her. Every time I went in, I'd light 2 candles. I'd light one for my mom, and I'd light one for my little brother who didn't have a chance. But after I had been through a lot of therapy, I was lighting a 3rd candle, and I was lighting it for my father, who took his own life. He committed suicide.
Hello and welcome to Ego is Here. Today I'm joined by Victor Rivas Rivers, actor, author, and advocate for survivors of abuse. This conversation is about survival, identity, and what we carry long after the world thinks we've moved on. Victor, I'm so honored to have you here.
My pleasure to be here. I'm glad to be a part of this conversation.
So, Victor, can you take us back to your childhood and help us understand what life felt like inside your home?
Okay, well, I was, I was born in Cuba, and I immigrated to the United States when I was 2 years old with my older brother and my mother and father. But my memories of abuse began as early as I can remember. From I want to say 18 months. I have a memory of falling backwards in a high chair that I talked to my mom about, when we were adults, and she started crying because she goes, "How can you remember that?" So it just tells you that the traumatic things that happen to us are seared in our memory, and they may come forward when you're not expecting it. So mine came to me in a dream. So domestic violence or violence in the household and child abuse. Um, it was in our house at the level of torture. And when I say torture, I'm not exaggerating. I can tell you that as a child, I was beaten, I was tied up, I was locked in closets, I was hammered, I was burned. Just to name a few of the things my father did. Of course, he was also doing this to my mother from the, like I said, my earliest memory, and to all of our siblings, and even included our pets, our dogs. So, that was, you have to remember, because of my age, I grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and there were no hotlines for women to call in the United States. There were no domestic violence shelters that my mother could have
Mhm.
run to. She didn't speak English very well, and so she couldn't really defend herself verbally. And so we were left to fend for ourselves, and including with the police coming to the house. Remember, all the police officers back then were all men. And the last time the police came to our house, the officer leaned into my father and he said, "You need to keep your woman in line." That's the last thing I heard. So that's sort of life in my house until I decided to take a different stance. But my father got away with it because I'm the spitting image of my father. So he was this friendly, handsome, charming guy,
Mhm.
and had a high security job at an aerospace industry. Everybody thought he was a great man outside the house. Inside our house lived the monster.
Mm.
And then we can get into this, as we can discuss. But I'm sure there was some mental illness involved and some other issues. But
Yes.
that was where we were at that time, and also where the United States, and I think even globally, the issue of violence against
Yes,
women
of
was
course.
was underreported, and also at a time where, depending on your culture, the man was considered the king of the house, and he had a right to do whatever he wanted, including, abusing his wife.
Exactly. When you look back at your younger self, do you feel like you became the person you wanted to be, or the person you had to become in order to survive?
Great question. So I think that if we, like people say, well, if if it could, anything could change if your life, you could go back to your life. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And my experience has made me the human being that I am, but also the man that I am. And so there's really nothing that I would have changed, that I could have changed, other than the fact that um, as a parent today, I just can't imagine how you could ever do that kind of damage, to your own child. Your partner, your spouse is that's not excusable either. But to your child, I don't understand, how that's possible. So I think I am who I am because of my experiences, and I think part of that is we all deal with this issue in
Mm.
different ways. Some become paralyzed in fear
Yes,
and try
yes.
to stay out of the way. Some go into denial, meaning that
Hmm.
they bury the memory, and that memory may come out at the the most inappropriate times, maybe even in an intimate situation
Hmm.
with a partner, and they buried it for years. And then the others, they become confrontational and full of rage. I was the latter case. I was the kid that confronted my father, who got angry, and probably could have been the most like him because I had that anger. But the one thing I know, and I'm not really big on astrology, but I'm a Libra, and Libras we're always seeking justice, and
Mm.
I think that was my job, was to seek justice in that household and see how we could change that. Including, I went to the police station myself at 12 years old,
Tell me
and
about that incident.
I got naked in front of a room full of officers at 12. This was after the police left our house and said, "Keep your woman in line."
Hmm.
And so I stood in front of the officers, and I had bruises, welts, burns on my body, because he made sure not to hit us where on our bodies,
Hmm.
where that we're
Yeah.
not covered up by clothing. So they were horrified at what they saw, and I told the officers, I said, "Now go to my house and arrest them and get them out of there for good." And the police said what they could do was, I'm 12 years old now. They said, "You can sign a formal complaint. We'll put you in the police car, take you back to the house, and we'll talk to your father." And I said, "You don't understand. If I do that and you don't arrest him when you leave, he's going to kill me." And they said there's nothing more that they could do, that it was a private family matter. And that is the title of my memoir. It's the
Of
title
your.
of my book. And you know this because I think you read the book. But the end of that story was, at 12 years old, I sat my mom and my older brother down at the kitchen table, and I said, "If I get a gun
Mhm.
and I shoot him, will you back me up?" And they didn't say yes, but their eyes did. So I went out in my neighborhood looking for a gun. And back then, and in those neighborhoods, and in that particular time in our country, guns were a lot harder to come by than they are today.
Mm.
So I'm thankful to God, whoever our higher power is, that He had a better plan for me. So I didn't do that, but ultimately, my father kidnapped us from Los Angeles, California. He took my mom, pregnant. We didn't know she was pregnant, to a motel, left her outside of town, and then took the rest of her children from Los Angeles to Miami, Florida. And my mom, it took her several days to get back to the house. And when she did, it turned out that she arrived, and everything in the house and everyone in the house had vanished without a trace. She didn't know where we were. So that's the other part of the story, is that we actually got kidnapped, and I ended up in Miami. And it took my mom many months to figure out where we were, have my baby sister, Carmen, and move to Miami herself. And she was granted a divorce back then, but because my father earned more money than
Mm.
my than her, he got to keep all the children living with him. So it didn't change anything. So,
It's unbelievable,
yeah.
Victor.
So
Wh- When
yeah,
you
so go ahead.
when you think of your mother today, what do you feel first? Love, pain, admiration, or something more complicated?
That's a great question. So my mother passed away many, many years ago, but at the age of 84, she lived a long life, and whatever. And so I've been asked over the years, like, who are some of your heroes in
Mm.
your life? And I put my mom at the top of that list, because as a parent, I can't imagine what my mother had to endure and witness being done to her children with her only remedy was, again, to kill him, to stop it. And at that particular time in our country, we didn't have the kind of legislation and rules and protective services that we have today. So my mom was a hero, but I also want to tell you there were 6 kids in my family.
Wow.
I have one brother who didn't survive. He passed away at the age of 9. And but there's 3 boys, and the siblings are 3 boys, two girls. And I can tell you probably the most amazing thing is that out of the 5 surviving children, and especially the men in our family, we have all broken the cycle of violence. And so to me, that tells me that somehow in my mother's very quiet, humble, and dignified way, she was able to instill a sense of goodness and resilience in her children because we've all managed to break the cycle of violence, which is rare for a family like ours.
It is. It is. Victor, tell me about that story when your mother collapsed and was taken to hospital, and she was too afraid to even say her name.
Yeah. So this was about that time when things were at the worst. I was around 12, 13 years old. I know I was in junior high. And my um, my mother, we didn't have a laundry machine, dryer in our house.
Hmm.
So my mom would have to go with a cart, behind her, dragging a cart with all the pile of clothes for all these kids and, husband and whatever to the laundromat to do the laundry. But during that time, my father had invented a new way to hit her, and he had a steel handled hairbrush, and he would hit her across right dead center in where her heart is. And eventually, it turned out that her heart was completely swollen. So on the way to the laundromat, she collapsed on the street, and they rushed her to a hospital where the doctors told her, "You're in God's hands." But my mother stayed in that hospital. It's a term here in the United States we use when you don't have a name. They call you a Jane Doe. My mother stayed in that hospital as a Jane Doe for 2 weeks because she was too afraid to give her real name for fear that my father would come and find her at the hospital. So it turned out that one of my um, you know classmates who my mom was good friends with came to me and said, your mom is in the hospital. That's where she's at. I thought he had killed her, or I didn't know what happened to her. I didn't think she had run away. And so I went to visit her at the hospital until my father found out. And then, I was, of course, punished severely, both mentally and physically for that. But my mother and I had kind of a secret pact. I always tried to protect her in whatever way I could. And she always tried to do the same for us in whatever way she could. But again, she was overwhelmed by the physical size. I think a woman is my equal in every way. But in most cases, I can dominate a woman physically.
Hmm.
I'm a big man. I'm over 6'2". I played
Yes.
college and professional football, so I'm a big guy. There are some women that could probably, because they have some martial arts skills or whatever. But as a whole, most men can dominate a woman physically,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so that's always been my. I always thought it was wrong from the moment I saw it the first time, and so in my life, that's always been something that I strive to be a man, and I'm as macho as you get. But part of what makes me a masculine man is that I will stand up to respect and protect women, and that I will show my emotions
Hmm.
because that's another thing we tell our boys not to do. So you have a bunch of
Yes.
boys that we're sitting on it, and eventually it's when it does come out, it usually comes out in violence.
Hmm.
So, interestingly, as an actor, I have played a lot of especially when I was younger, I played a lot of violent individuals on
Hmm.
screen. And I did one movie that has this crazy cult following around the world called Blood In, Blood Out, and I play a convict, and people actually tattoo my image on their body all over the world. It's just the
Yes.
strangest thing. But we were actually in San Quentin, which is a notorious prison here in California.
Hmm.
That's where we filmed with the all the inmates around us are the real inmates of San Quentin in the movie. And I walked around that prison, and my character's name was Magic Mike. So I'm like the original Magic Mike, but he doesn't dance. And but I walked around that prison, and I went there, but for the grace of God. because that's exactly where I was heading.
Yeah.
Because I eventually I joined a street gang when I was a kid because I was so angry and violent, and that's violence is all I knew. And but the part of the story that I'm sure we're going to get to is that we've all heard the African saying that it takes a village to raise a child. Well, I'm that child. And there's another African saying that we don't, it's not as popular, but it comes from the Maasai tribe in
Hmm. Hmm.
Africa. And they ask the question, how are the children? And they feel that this is a way to gauge the health of the community. If the children are well, then so too is the rest of the tribe. And so that's the back end of my story is, how do we heal and um, how do we transform? So,
Yeah. Now that you said that word transform, how were you able to transform your anger over the years? Did you learn, to transform it, or did you learn to live with it?
so that's a great question. So the way that my relationship with my father ended was I was 15 and a half. That's after he had already kidnapped us. We were now in Miami. My mother had just moved to Miami, but she couldn't have us.
Hmm.
And so my father was about to beat one of my siblings for something really like stupid, and you would never do that to a child. And in defending my brother, I ended up fighting my father physically. It was the first time I ever confronted him, and I was bigger than he was, and I won the fight that night. And so the minute he left the house, grabbed my bag, little grocery bag with some of my stuff in it, and I ran away from home. And I lived on the streets for several days, terrified that the police, my father, somebody was going to find me. And one of my high school classmates found me on the street and said, everyone's looking for you, the police, the school, and of course your father. And I broke down, finally, and I was, I'd been living on the streets. I was hungry and scared, and I just said, and remember, I'm 15, I'm 6'2", and over 200 pounds. I'm the size of a man. And I just told him what happened, and he took me home to his father. And I like to say that there's angels in my life that showed up. Well, his father happened to be one of those angels. He was also a lawyer. So we took my father to court, and they gave me what was basically a restraining order back then. And so it
Hmm.
was unheard of for a 15-year-old child back in the 70s to take, but so I got my freedom. The only difference in today's world is in today's environment here in the United States, they would have taken all the children away from him. I got my freedom. My siblings did not. So my high school took me in. I was a gang member, but I was also a very good athlete. I played baseball, but when I got to high school, I discovered football, American football. And, um, and I realized that it gave me a healthy outlet for my rage. I was so angry, and I could put a helmet on and the shoulder pad just like everybody else,
Hmm.
and I could go after people. And my teammates actually nicknamed me. My nickname was the Mad Cuban, because they said when I put a helmet on, they could see my eyes would change, and
Yeah.
I was kind of dangerous on the field. But the beauty of the game is that it gave me this healthy outlet for my rage and what had happened to me as a child. But it also ended up paying for my education in college because I was such a good athlete. I was able to go to college on a full scholarship, which I wouldn't have been able to do. And but in high school, I lived with 7 families and unofficial foster child. There was no paperwork. They just took me in. And then the very last family that took me in was another Cuban family. And their son became an actor. Nobody could say Echevarria in Hollywood, so he changed his name to Stephen Bauer. So if you've ever seen the movie Scarface, he was Pacino's handsome partner, Manny Manolo, who's in the whole film with Pacino.
Hmm.
That's like my foster brother. His family took me in, and that's where I lived all through college. And I'm still a member of that family today. So that's part of my transformation is having a healthy outlet, whatever it is, whether it's music, dance, poetry, writing, whatever it is. And in this country, when they're
Hmm.
cutting our budgets, the first thing they take away from our kids are the free music, dance, sports, the things that gave me a chance to feel like a winner and maybe a champion when I wasn't getting that message at home. And so that's so important. So I advocate for making sure that we have the budgets for those programs, because in our country we seem to have billions of dollars to build more and more prisons every year,
Yes.
and most
Yes.
of the prisons are filled with black and brown kids, and I'm Latino, so I would be, even though I'm very light skinned, I'm a Latino, and so I was heading that way. So
Mm,
that's what the village can do. That's why I say I'm the child that the village raised.
yes. So, Victor, what drew you to acting?
Great question. So when I got to college, I went to Florida State University and I played football there. I wanted to take theater there. They had a really good theater department, but the coaches and the academic advisors for the football team said, "When are you going to find time to do that? Because you have to act in plays, you have to do that."
Hmm.
So my degree actually from college is in criminology, criminal justice. So I was going to go into law enforcement.
Hmm.
And by the way, that's something I've talked to lots of law enforcement officers that have heard me speak at a conference or whatever, and they've come, especially the men will come up to me and they'll say the same thing that I felt, and that was I wanted to go into law enforcement so I could put away the bad
Yes.
guy that was my father.
Yes. Yes.
And but Steven Bauer had just started his acting career in Hollywood, and I was out with the NFL professional football team, the
Hmm.
Miami Dolphins. And the only big deal in Miami was I was the first Cuban, so it was like everybody was excited because there's a huge Cuban community in Miami,
Hmm.
Florida, and so when then my career ended. I was out with them for 2 years. My career ended, and Steven said, before you become a police officer, I know you wanted to try acting. Why don't you come out to Hollywood? So I went out to Hollywood. I did a play, and somebody. Like when I first got out there, I got in a play. I did a play, and somebody saw me in the play and gave me my first job as an actor. And but like every other actor, I struggled. I was a bouncer. I was a bartender. I
Hmm.
did roofing. Andy Garcia, the actor Andy
Hmm.
Garcia, and I, we were movers. We moved people with like a big truck, and so you do whatever you can until you start to, and then
Exactly.
so in my
Yes.
in my 30s is when I started to like when I became a working actor. So
Mm.
I always had to support, and that's what most actors you see.
Yeah,
You
of
think
course.
we do every kind of job. And like
Exactly.
they say, like every like waiter and every waiter in Los Angeles is either a writer, an actor, a producer, a
Yes.
director,
Yes.
or
Yes.
so you
Exactly.
never know you never know who's serving you, because
Who's serving you?
they might be the
Exactly.
next big director. So
So
yeah, that's my story, and that's how I got into acting.
after playing so many characters, do you feel like acting helped you discover who you are or hide parts of yourself?
No, I think actually with the beauty of acting is, and I'm not the one that this is not my quote, but it's the art of revealing.
Mm,
And so I think we reveal what the average person in society tells us, oh, don't show this, or don't show that, or don't be emotional, or if you're a woman, if you're emotional, you're emotional, then they might call you the B word, or
mm.
whatever. And it's like, but as an actor, that's our job, is to reveal what you want to, what you as so like, to me, one of the most important films last year that got a lot of attention. Didn't win the Oscar, but to me, the film Hamnet was such a powerful, beautiful film about emotion, about being a parent, about, I mean, so many different things. Not just about Hamlet. It was just such a powerfully moving, and and I think that's that's the beauty of what acting. So through my roles, I was able to. I did this one character, not the Magic Mike one, but I did another character, and I was being interviewed for a magazine, and the reporter was asking me. The character was a real scary guy, and
I can imagine.
the reporter was asking me, "Where did you find him?" And I said, "I lived with him. It was my father." So my father was the most dangerous and the
Yes.
most deviant, the way I'm talking to you right now, with a smile in my eyes. That's when my father was it was the scariest. So did he have rage? Yeah. Was there alcohol and drugs? Not to my knowledge. I mean,
Mhm.
he might have an occasional drink, but I never saw. We didn't have a bar, and like everybody back then, always had like a like a little bar in their house, and you'd come
Yes.
home and have a cocktail. I never saw my father do those things. But I can assure you now that I'm older, my minor from college is in psychology. And my book, by the way, is used in a lot of therapists' office. They use it around the country. And, I know now that my father had a serious mental illness that went unchecked, that it was just a different time. Excuse me. People didn't go to see therapists back then. And I'm going to use the example of my mom. This is, much later. My mom's retired, and it's been divorced from my father for, decades and whatever. And, we as her children would say, Mommy, you should really go talk to somebody.
Hmm.
You've been through so much. And she would say, no, eso para los locos. That's for the crazy people.
Yes, yes,
Because
yes.
that's her era. If you went to a therapist, the next thing they
Hmm.
would say, we're going to put you in an asylum, in the institution. So
Yes.
my mom never got therapy, and she desperately needed the therapy because my
Yeah.
father tried to break our spirits. He never broke mine, but he broke my mother's. He broke her spirit.
Yes.
And so, that's something that she had to live with her whole life, but she also had the beauty of seeing her children grow up, her children become parents, and some of her children become grandparents. And so that's, she got to see all of that before she passed. And again, she passed at 84, so she lived a full life.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's a lot that I've been able to pull from as an actor, and now I'm starting to play because I've aged. I'm older now, and got lighter hair and whatever. So now I've aged into now I'm playing a I played a psychiatrist on the show Better Call Saul. I'm currently doing there's a really probably the most popular show and winning all the awards right now is a show on HBO Max called The Pit, and
The
it's a,
pit.
it's a
Yes.
hospital show with Noah Wiley. So I'm the CEO of the hospital, and in it, and so I did 2 episodes, and we'll see if they bring me back next year. But I'm proud to be a part of that show because they're dealing with real issues that are currently going on, including abuse of women,
Hmm.
the situation with immigration here in this country, and how it impacts hospitals. So, that's the other part of acting that I love is that we can address societal issues, including violence against women. And
Exactly.
there's usually when we say violence against women, we usually leave one word out because the overwhelming percentage of women are being violated by men. So
Hmm.
it's men's violence against women. And so the only way people ask me, well, how can we change this? And I say the best way is we need to redefine manhood for our young boys and young men. And so that's what I did with my son. My son, Eli, started speaking at 5.5 years old. He joined me at the podium the first time. And so all through grade school, high school, he created a club at his school, Teens Against Domestic Violence. My son went to Harvard, and he was involved with Harvard Men Against Rape. And now he went to Georgetown Law School, and now he's a lawyer in New York. And part of he's at a really big firm, big clients. But one of the things that he likes about their firms, they do a lot of pro bono work, so they help
Hmm.
people that don't have the
Yes.
means. And so he's just beginning his career as a lawyer, but just that's how I broke the cycle of violence. My son smashed it by what
Yes.
he's doing.
Exactly.
And so
Exactly.
that's how, if we can just change how we raise our boys in all countries, because, I believe you can judge a society by how we treat our women. And, we're doing better here, but we're not there yet. And we're going backwards in some ways in our country without getting too political. But there's a lot of women's rights being taken away currently right now in our country, in the United States. And people are pushing back, but there's some damages that's been done already. So, like if I had a young daughter right now, she might have less rights than my mom had,
That's
currently
unbelievable.
in the United States, which is hard to believe. And I
Yeah.
know worldwide you guys are watching us, and and it's not us, we're pushing back, but that shows you what one person or one ideology can do to change. And
Yes. Yes.
so that's my political statement for today. But we're better than that. I'm an immigrant to this country, proud to be an American citizen,
Uh,
but we are not doing a good job right now, and we have to do better.
Victor, when it comes to men speaking about abuse, whether as victims or even acknowledging trauma. Do you feel that stigma still exists?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is. So this is the problem with this issue with domestic violence or violence, just violence in our home, but domestic violence is that it thrives in an atmosphere of shame, denial, and silence. So, there's all of those things attached to it.
Hmm.
So like as an example, we know that domestic violence can go in reverse. We know men can be abused too,
Exactly.
by their partner, whether it's same
Hmm.
sex or whether it's their wife or, or
Hmm.
their female partner. It can happen. Less likely, but it happens. So you imagine if that's happening to a man, how much more that man will sit on it because of the
Yes.
shame that he might
Yes.
have involved with that. So that's we have to. And here's what I'm going to say: most men are good men. As a majority, most men are good men. But here's the problem: we will stand by silently when we hear or see things. And I'm going to use the example of five guys in a sports bar. We're watching
Hmm.
our favorite team playing football or soccer or whatever it is. And we're having our beer and we're talking. And one of the men will, and I'm not going to use the language, it's not going to be that foul, but one man will say, "Oh, I had to slap my bitch upside the head last night." And the other five guys that would never do that, instead of like not confronting him physically, but confronting him right there, they
Mm.
all go like this. And they just turn back to the game and and they never say a word. And so we're complicit. That guy just said something that you don't agree with, but you didn't say anything.
Yes.
He thinks you agree with him. And so that's not going to change him. But if you suddenly said, "You know what, pal, got a problem with that,"
Mm.
we might start to have these conversations without it getting physical. It doesn't have to be that you're going to, confront the guy, because we violence and violence doesn't
Mm.
help.
Yes.
But that's a moment for men where we can change that. And I'm going to use this other example, and this comes from a guy that I train with, very famous um, trainer of men and people in military and sports. His name is Jackson Katz.
Hmm.
He's got a doctorates and all that. He writes and all that. But I went to one of his trainings, and he uses this exercise um, for college, like at a college. Like, so he'll have, female students and male
Hmm.
students in the room. He'll have a whiteboard, and down the middle of the whiteboard, he draws a line. He puts men on this side and women on this side. And he always starts with the men. He says to the men, he goes, "Tell me everything you did today to avoid being sexually assaulted." And the men will just sit there and go, or they'll make some crude joke like, "Don't drop the soap," or something
Yes. Yes.
silly like
Yes.
that. Nothing on the male side. Then they turn, and he'll turn and say, "Okay, ladies," and they just start going down the list. "Well, I can't wear short skirt when I go running. I can't listen to my music too loud because I got a keys in my hand. I don't get in the elevator.
Mhm.
Boom, 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 all the different things that women do on a daily basis so
Yes.
that you don't get assaulted. You have to be always on and the guys start getting mad on, these guys that are their friends, sometimes even their boyfriends are getting mad because they had no idea that that's what women deal with every day. You guys deal with this every day. You have to be on high alert for certain things. You
Yes,
can't just
Victor. But
relax.
those men have sisters. They have daughters. They have
Mothers.
mothers.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
unbelievable that they're not aware of that.
Yeah, and that's where we have to have a conversation. We have to keep
Mm.
talking. That's the only way. We have to have dialogue, and that's what we're doing today. And to
Yes.
any of your listeners that will listen in, possibly even those that might listen in and then say, "Hey, honey, can you sit down and listen to this? What this man is saying?"
Mm.
And again, I'm in American society, I would be considered what they call an alpha male because I played college and professional football, so I'm this
Yes.
big athlete, and then I've played all these like tough guys on screen and all that. But I'm telling you that there's a more peaceful and more humane way to treat each other, and so those are roles I'm playing, and I'm playing them specifically to maybe open up the dialogue,
Hmm.
but but in real life, this is who I am. And so I think we need to have more men. If more men are standing up, then we are, they say children, the peer group pressure is real important in children. Peer group pressure is just as important in adults. We do, if everybody says, hey, let's go do this, and we all go, okay, let's go do this, even though you may disagree with it. And so the average person, there are very few leaders in the world.
Mm.
We have many, many followers. So maybe the ones that you think are leaders should be telling us this message. And that's why, I'm concerned about in this country, because we have a leader who's we know his history with women, and I have a real issue with that. And so I can't talk politics with certain people, because to me, it's not an issue that we have a difference of opinion. We have a difference of morality, you
Hmm.
know. So
Yes.
that's a
Yes.
big, big difference. So
That's a big difference. Yeah. Victor, is there any part of you that still hasn't fully healed?
great question. So during the COVID, so I never really had any formal therapy. And then it was so at 65 was
Hmm.
when COVID hit.
Yes.
And so I started doing, we're all like locked at home. And I found a way that there was a lot of Zoom therapy going on. So I started therapy at 65. And I've worked for two different therapists. I'm not working with one right now, but I thought, that I was completely, that I'm good. I was a
Hmm.
good,
Hmm.
good, good husband, good father. Um, you know, um, everything, I'm successful in my career, all these kind of different things. I'm a speaker on the issue. But then I got together with the therapist, and I discovered so many different things. Um, and um, one was, my whole life I've lived on, like women do, living on high alert. I was on high alert all the time because of what I experienced as a child. So even as a parent and a father and whatnot, I was on high alert for my son or people around me.
Hmm.
And so my therapist said, you know how to put the armor on, if you need to put the armor on, she goes, take the armor off now.
Hmm.
So it was like, it was the greatest gift she gave me. So I was able to go for the first time, and so I'm a completely, I'm still the same person, but I am in a much more tranquil state of mind.
Hmm.
And then with the second therapist, we worked on what's, we like to call the wounded boy. There's a boy inside me that had things done to him that should have never happened, and he was still in there,
Yes.
so and I'm going to use this, the most, because we talk about forgiveness. I've been asked about forgiveness.
Hmm.
um, they said, have you ever forgiven your father? And so my first response to that question years ago was asked by a family member, right before my book was coming out. And they said, because if you don't forgive your father, you can't go to heaven. So they were devout Catholics.
Hmm.
and um, and I thought about that, and I finally came up with the answer. It was a year later when I came back home for another like Christmas, and I said, "Oh, by the way, I have the answer to your question about forgiveness." And they said, "Well, what is it?" I don't allow his behavior in my house, and I teach peace.
Hmm.
And if that's my forgiveness, and if God is whoever He is, then I should get into heaven, whatever if
Yes.
we're
Yes.
talking philosophically. But what I've learned is, after the therapy, I was traveling a lot to Europe. And, in Europe, you have all those beautiful, this country is so young, and you end up in these beautiful churches
Hmm.
and cathedrals. And everywhere I went, I would light two candles. Every time I went in, I light two candles. I'd light one for my mom, and I'd light one for my little brother who didn't have a chance. And, but my second trip to Europe was after I had been through a lot of therapy. I was lighting a third candle, and I was lighting it for my father, who took his own life. He committed suicide, because he was so unhappy. And that's I'm never going to forget what he did, but I began the process of forgiving him in whatever way that I could. And I would continue. And he missed out on so much. He missed out on this beautiful family with all these beautiful children who are all successful and great parents. He missed all that because he struggled so much.
Do you believe that someone who has experienced abuse can ever fully heal? Or is the trauma something that always stays with you, shaping who you are?
That's a great question. So I think that ultimately, that um, I think the trauma will always be there.
Hmm.
like, but it's something you can call on. That when you control the story. So I'm going to use the example of the term PTSD, which is post traumatic stress syndrome,
Yes, I
which is
suffer
a
from
lot of
PTSD.
which a lot of soldiers. I
Yes.
suffer from it too. So a lot of soldiers come back from combat zones. So what
Yes.
therapists do with them is they have them tell their story over and over and over. And a lot of people say, well, doesn't that just bring the trauma back? No, eventually they control the narrative. They control the story. It's their story. And once they know that and they survived it,
Hmm.
there's a strength in that trauma, that comes. So that's what I would say. Those that have been through, like me, myself, maybe yourself, that we've been through our own trauma,
Hmm.
that you will continue to heal. You'll continue and also if you find the right partner, if you find, whatever, however you like, part of my healing and my book ends with the birth of my son, Eli, because I was 39 years old, about to turn 40.
Hmm.
I never hit a woman in my life, but I'd never been a parent. And it was in a moment when they put my son in my arms and I cut his cord at the hospital and I put him in my arms and I wanted him to feel my strength because that strength was going to protect him and love him, not hurt him. And that's when I knew that I was at peace and I was at home. And that's when I knew the cycle of violence was truly broken in my life. And so those are the kind of the moments that you can always turn back to and go, wow, that was a milestone moment in my life. And where a lot of healing happened, excuse me, in one moment. And so yeah, I think that it's there, but it's part of our own individual history,
Hmm.
and it's how we use it. If we wallow in it, then no, we're not going to heal. If we just wallow out, because no, it's what,
Yes.
I'm the man I am. I'm strong. I'm all these things. I'm loving. I'm emotional. I'm sensitive. I'm all those things because of everything I experienced. And once I learned to, like, in essence, take the layers off, like they in the movie Shrek, he says,
Hmm.
taking the layers off the onion.
Yes.
That's me.
Yes.
I'm like, I used to, I thought when I was a 14 and a half year old boy in my high school, I was walking the halls and people would just get out of the way. Not because I was pushing people, I was never a bully, but you could tell that, like, I was angry and they just got out of my way. And then
Yes.
little by little, I transformed from that. I thought I was physically ugly and scary, and women were scared of me and all that, like I didn't even think I was good looking because, and then I was also told I was stupid my whole life. And then when I got to college and I started making the honor roll in college is when I realized, wait a minute, I'm actually really smart. And when I learned the power of language, I was able to articulate my pain with my words
Hmm.
instead of my fists. And so that was a transformation, just, education, words,
Hmm.
language. Those were all, again, healing parts. So, like I just say, this,
Yes.
like, just try to be a student of life, and then that's what I am now. It's like, I want to be a student until I take my last breath. And I want to continue to become a better man until I take my last breath. I'm not perfect, but I consider myself a righteous man, a man
Hmm.
who will try to do the right thing.
Victor, do you feel that laws to date are truly able to protect families, or are there still critical gaps?
So great question. So I would say um, that I'm just using the United States as an example. A lot of people don't know this because when I first started speaking on the issue, he happened to be a senator at the time. So Senator Joe Biden, who ended up becoming President Joe Biden,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, uh, so Senator Joe Biden wrote the Violence Against Women Act. So when you hear the word, the acronym VAWA, that's the Violence Against Women Act. So that law, and that created legislation, it created funding for more programs, more hotlines, more shelters, more training for law enforcement. And there are actually law enforcement departments if they're well funded. For instance, when there's a domestic violence call, the officers are on their way. They are also calling the advocate. And the advocate's almost arriving at the house at the same time. So there's not just a badge, there's
Hmm.
somebody from the shelter, somebody from the program. So
Yes.
we've come a long way. That's the good news. Fantastic news. Here's the bad news. violence against women is as prevalent today as it was in my childhood.
Mm.
So we know globally, not just in the United States,
Globally, yes.
globally, 1 in 3 women, or 1 in 4, 1 in 3, 1 in 4, it's always there's not a big discussion there, are going to be a victim of a violent crime in their life. And usually it's going to be a rape, or it's going to be, assault,
Hmm.
sexual assault, or it's going to be domestic violence. And so, so we still have a long way to go. So we're not there yet. And law enforcement can continue to do a better job. But I think it's going to take all of us. And it's going to take, like I say, I'm the example of a community investing in one kid.
Hmm.
And then this one kid has, and ended up becoming a spokesperson for advocacy against violence against women, against children, and how do we better, how can we create a more humane and peaceful world? That's just one child impacted, or one person impacted by the help of others. So,
Hmm.
and there's law enforcement involved in my story. There's teachers, there's coaches, there's families, that means it's the community, it's the village.
Hmm.
And so I'm just one example of what can be done. And so so I think that we in each country it's different. It depends on how the laws are. But again, we have to do a better job in how we see women. And like in other countries in the world, there have been plenty of women leaders, presidents or chancellors of other countries. We haven't had that yet here. We've had 2 women run for president, and you know
Yes.
they did well, but they didn't become president. And so I think, people ask me, well, years ago they would ask me, because I was going to Congress a lot to
Hmm.
lobby on these issues, the same issues we're talking about. And people ask me, they go, "Well, how do we change this?" And I'm looking around, and back then, our Congress was a boys' club. There were
Hmm.
some women, but it was a boys' club. And I said, "You need to elect more women." So the good news is we have a lot more women in leadership
Yes.
positions in our country, but not at the top position yet. And I think that's when we get to that place, that'll be like Barack Obama being the first, African American to become president of our, I never saw that coming in my lifetime. I would have thought a woman would be president before we'd have a black man as
Yes.
president. And so it's time for us to show some leadership, and maybe have the female perspective in charge, because maybe we'll have maybe some different laws, or different types of funding or legislation, or different conversations, and like we're having today.
Yes. 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 Victor, when you think about children and parents still trapped in abuse environments, what do you feel society still doesn't fully understand about their reality?
I think the biggest reality, and we hit on it a little bit earlier, is that this particular issue it thrives in an atmosphere of shame, denial, and silence. So a lot of people don't realize, it's like
And
you
fear.
a lot and fear, and so a lot of people think that, for instance, that this issue is only for like an immigrant issue, or it's a black issue, or it's a lower class or lower socioeconomic issue. This issue
No,
occurs
no,
in
no.
all homes.
Mm.
There are
Mhm.
prominent, powerful women that are also in this
Of
situation.
course.
And so and sometimes the more powerful, the more educated you are, the more shame there is. That, like, you should know better. You're smarter than that. And I'm just going, so, that's so when people say, "Why didn't your mom just leave?"
Just
And I
leave.
go,
Yeah. Yes. Just.
I'm just going, because why? Because my father threatened my mother. If she
Mhm.
left, he would kill us.
Mhm.
He'd start
Mhm.
killing her children.
Yes. Yes.
So that's one of the reasons my mom's a hero. She stayed in that environment because she knew there was nobody there to help us. So if she left to protect herself, then her children would end up possibly being killed by this madman, which, could have happened.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
eventually, like I say, my father was so unhappy and troubled that he took his own life. But, he had a gun at that time. He could have done something else with that gun. And we didn't have a gun in the house. That was I think the saving grace of our
Yes.
story is that, guns weren't that prominent in the
Mhm.
United States at that time, and my father didn't own a gun. because, he might have been that guy, the murder suicide guy who is so unhappy that he takes his whole family out and then himself.
Yes, of course.
And so again, that's that fear that people live in, that shame, and then a lot of times it's just a you know and then when you try to talk to somebody, the other title of my book is the Spanish title of my book is called Asunto de Familia. So when you which means it's a family issue. So like when you're talking to somebody, even culturally, like in the Latino community, about what's going on next door, and they go, no, no, eso asunto de ellos. It's their
Mm,
that's their issue, not
that's
ours.
good.
And I go,
Yeah,
and I'm going to give you, because you know how many school shootings we have in this country,
yeah, I
right?
know.
So
I
I've
know.
been talking about this for years, about the kid who's being bullied at home, by someone bigger than they
Mhm.
are. That's sometimes the kid who comes to school and becomes the bully.
Of course.
And then sometimes the kid who's being bullied is the kid who shows up at school with a gun
Mhm.
to seek revenge. And that's what we saw when the first big shooting here was Columbine, when we saw those kids that were kind of the kids that were being picked on. They came to school and started killing everybody. So I've been talking about that for years, that there's a direct result of, consequence from what happens in our homes ends up on our school campuses, on our streets, and in our world. Well, back on Valentine's Day in 2018, a troubled student like me, a young man, walked onto the campus of Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and he opened fire. And within 6 minutes, 17 people, innocent people, were dead, 14 were wounded. My niece was shot 4 times. My sister's daughter was shot 4 times. And she survived and has become a big advocate on the issue. She actually got nominated for an Oscar for her short documentary film, called, Death by Numbers. And, but it happened in my family. It came and it even hit I've been talking about it for years, and there it was. This kid,
Mm, mm.
had access to guns, had a troubled background where he was bullied by someone at home, but he had access to 10 guns. And, and so even my own family was directly, a victim of of a school shooting. And, so that's why when people say it's not my issue, yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Because it might be, you may not think so, but that, if you got a daughter,
Mhm.
that guy may date your daughter one day, or what, so like
Yes,
it's a
yes,
cycle. It's a cycle
yes.
that we need to change that. And again, I think one of it's a new solution. I call it a new solution to an old problem, is we have to have men sit at the table, not lead the table. Because like when it comes to most social justice programs, domestic violence, civil rights, women are usually the ones that have are the pioneers that have paved the
Mm,
way. So I just asked the women that I was working with in the domestic violence world to just give me a seat at the table and let me follow your lead. And
mhm,
that's
mm.
been my journey, is I'm a man in the movement, but I've been surrounded by these powerful women who have guided me like my mother did. So that's the other part of my story, is that's why I honor women, because I've seen women do the most amazing things, and with the smallest amount of resources, and still get things done. And that's why, I have no problems following a woman in leadership. So.
That's beautiful. Yes, Victor. Tell me, what is your definition of success, and has it changed over the years?
Great question. So, I think about like where I came from and where I am today, and I'll only say, because you asked me the question, I don't go around talking about this all the time. But when I think about like my life and my accomplishments, I got to, as an athlete, I got to play at the highest level at college, and
Mhm.
a little bit on the professional level. So that's an incredible accomplishment. And as an actor, I have I've there are millions and millions of people worldwide that have seen me, seen my work as an actor. Um, I would say, certainly probably hundreds of thousands of people have read my book. And then those that have heard me speak um, because of our streaming services and everything else, I would say millions of people have heard me speak. I've spoken internationally a few times,
Mm,
but I've spoken in this country a lot. Um, so so I would say that, I'm very proud of those roles as an athlete, as an actor, as an athlete, as an activist. But here's my most important role. It's that of father
The
to
father.
my son Eli.
Mm.
And so that we only had one child, but we started late, my ex-wife and I, but to me, that's my most important role in life. And that my son, part of my journey is I believe that I've had the incredible opportunity to pay it forward to all of those people who invested in me. I could
Mhm.
never write a check and go, well, that was worth this much or that. No, there's no monetary result on that. I just believe that that's part of my journey is how can I pay it forward? And so that's how when I think about success, I think about that. I think about the fact that I have not repeated the cycle, that I teach peace, um, and that I continue I thought I was done speaking maybe a couple of years ago. After COVID, there was very little speaking involved because we we weren't getting together in person, and then this happened. Then we got
Yes.
we I
Yes.
started doing some Zoom conferences and whatever, and I realized that I'm still on the journey.
Mm.
Like my life's not over, so
Yeah, of course.
why should I quiet my voice? Why should I not use the power of because one of
Mhm.
the things that we do when we go see music or we go see a play or we go see a movie or we go to the ballet or it's the opera is the power of story, and the power of story can move us into action. And so I happen to be in a creative field where I can also use so that's why like this year, like I was just saying, I'm on the show, The Pit,
Mhm.
and it's an emergency hospital room show that is so well done. And they handle some really tough issues while they're healing people. They're actually dealing
Mhm.
with some of the issues we just talked about. And so that's what art can do. And so that's part of my journey and I feel successful is that I've had, a long career and again, as an actor, I can work until I take my last breath. So I'm not retired. Maybe I don't work as much, but that doesn't matter. I'm also enjoying my solitude, my life,
Of course.
this other part of my journey.
Yes.
And so yeah, success is what we make it. And it has nothing to do, but I've been around lots of money, and I can tell you two things about money. Having that kind of wealth, it doesn't buy class
Mhm.
and it doesn't buy happiness.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so
Of
you
course.
know, like you, so like I couldn't be more calm and more grounded and more happiest than I am right now. So,
That's lovely. That's
yeah.
amazing. Victor, what is your greatest moment from the industry?
I would say, so the film that I was talking about earlier, the one where people tattoo me and they, whatever. So it's called Blood In, Blood Out, and it's directed by Taylor Hackford, who directed Officer and a Gentleman, a very famous movie, and the movie Ray that Jamie
Mhm.
Foxx won the Academy about Ray Charles.
Yes.
It has Billy Bob Thornton in it, who's he was writing Sling Blade while we were in prison. Delroy Lindo is also in it. He was just nominated for an Oscar this year for Sinners. So it's got a lot of people you're going to recognize in the film, but we are in San Quentin prison, and so this story is a story. It's about three young boys. I'm not one of the young boys, but the three young boys who grow up in East LA, which is like a Latino barrio
Mhm. Mhm.
in Los Angeles. And so it's a film about culture, it's a film about family, and it's a film about choices. And one of them doesn't make the right choice, so he ends up in prison. So to me, that film, the fact I've been in big blockbuster films. I played Antonio Banderas' brother in The Mask of Zorro. I was
Mhm.
in Steven Spielberg's Amistad. I was in this film, that film, all these big films. And this one didn't make a lot of money in the box office, but it has this following. Its film is almost 34 years old now,
Mhm.
and it has three generations going on four, and it's still rings true to people because it speaks the truth. So that film, it did two things. It obviously, for a lot of us, we all kind of our careers kind of took off a little bit after this
Mhm.
film, but more importantly, for me, it changed my perspective on incarceration about, like, let's not spend this billions and billions of dollars in prison, because I got to spend 5 weeks in the prison. Everybody you see in the movie around us are the real convicts doing time. The
Mhm.
warden in the movie is the real warden of San Quentin at the time. And so we're in the mix. I saw things that the average person wouldn't see. And the other thing I want to tell you, every man that I talked to in San Quentin prison had family violence in his background.
Mhm.
So it just shows you, we're not born bad or violent. We have to
Yes.
learn that
Yes.
behavior. If my story tells you anything, is that
Mhm.
you can unlearn the behavior, right? So that's why that film to me is is I would say probably my best, or my most memorable role, because as an actor, part of being an actor is, you can put the uniform on and all that. You want to get into the character, and I had no choice. I was in the prison. I was dressed just like them. I'm covered in tattoos, so you won't recognize me when you see pictures of me from that film. But I literally was in the prison population for 5 weeks, and I saw firsthand what goes on there, and I realized that there's no rehabilitation in prison to speak of.
Mhm.
We need to
Mhm.
we need to get to these young men and women before they
Yes.
get there, like my
Yes.
community got to me. And
Mhm.
so that, to me, that's my greatest accomplishments, because I learned the most from the character. And of all the films that I've done, it's the one I'm most recognized for.
Mhm.
Like I
Mhm.
said, I can go to a Comic-Con, which is, like where you go sign
Yeah,
autographs and stuff like
it's
that. And I have a Star Trek character. I got this picture. I'm the voice of Hawkman on a
Mhm.
TV, like a cartoon. I'm all this different things. And the only one they're buying is Blood In, Blood Out, is Magic Mike, because that character means so much to a lot of
Mhm.
people, and that film meant so much to people. So that to me is that moment as an actor where I had what they call full immersion. I was immersed in the character. So every day when I would walk out of the makeup trailer was in the middle of the prison yard, and I'd come out with all my tattoos, and I'd have my dark glasses on, and I'd come out. I was Magic. Nobody knew my real name. I was Magic all day long. And so, my character's a guy you didn't mess with. So the prisoners didn't mess with me. I gave them respect. They respected me. So it kind of worked out. So I didn't get hurt. But I would say that film, is it's meant so much to so many generations of people. And I play a, just a, I'm not the lead in it, but I play a significant role in the
Mhm.
film, and it seemed to hit home with a lot of people. So I'm very, very proud of that accomplishment, and I would consider that probably, um, maybe the most important film I've done. I've done very important films, but this one was, I think, the best.
Mhm. So, Victor, thank you so, so much for being here. It was truly an honor. I really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I was so looking forward to it. Um, Tell me, would you like to say something about your plans for the future? What projects are you currently working on besides the pit, as you mentioned?
Sure. So the one project that I have a couple of producing partners, but I have one of my producers. So we have taken A Private Family Matter, which I know you read, the book,
Yes.
and it's too much story to do in a movie. So
Mhm.
the new format that a lot of people are doing is, because of the streaming services we have, is called the limited series. So we have written a limited series, and so we're out shopping it right now to follow the
Mhm.
story from the beginning of the book to probably the birth of Eli, because that's where the book ends. And so that's what we're currently working on. And then I would say, you know, e- everything else. And like I said, everything we talked about my life currently, and everything is really good. I would just say to your audience, out there, is that, there's always hope. And to the men in the audience is, is for them to to stand up, because I know most of the men that will be listening to this conversation and stay on for the full hour are going to be good men, because they want to learn,
Mhm.
they want to. And so let's start having that dialogue amongst ourselves as men, and it'll make us better men, better husbands, and better fathers. And I believe there's always hope, and so that's the message I'd like to leave the audience and say, we can all pay it forward. We have people that have helped us along the way. We're not here by ourselves, and
Mm.
um, that's it. And you can break the cycle of violence. There is always hope, and we can strive to be more humane and peaceful.
Yes. Yes. So thank you so much, Victor. Thank you for your time. And to all of you out there, as we always say, ego is here, you are here, and that's enough.